I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. In this episode, I'm very pleased to have a double interview with Dan Pearson and Midori Shintani, the two key horticultural forces driving the Tokachi Millennium Forest project in Hokkaido, Japan, and co-authors of the book Tokachi Millennium Forest, Pioneering a New Way of Gardening with Nature. I speak to Midori first, then Dan, about this vast 1,000-year project, their hopes and intentions for now and the future, and about their own places within the timeline of the forest. I began by asking Midori how big the site is and whether it's all gardened.
Okay, the whole site has a pioneering history, and size is 988 acres, which had been cultivated by humans' hands since 1898, when the first generation of pioneers arrived at this area of Tokachi. So there's no primeval land at the Tokachi Millennium Forest. And 670 acres is covered by the secondary forest. And the rest of the site is garden, farmland, meadow, and housing land, of course. And the land garden is about 50 acres. But the garden side has no boundary, because the whole garden site is designed with the art of shake, means borrowing view, by master planners Dan Pearson and Tokachi Landscape Planning.
With that in mind, how do you manage a place so large with a team of 3 gardeners and occasional students?
Luckily, my current team is formed by 4 full-time gardeners, including me, and 1 seasonal gardener, 1 seasonal lawn keeper. This man is a specialist of lawn, and plus we occasionally, yes, like you said, we occasionally have 1 or 2 student gardeners and volunteer staff during the summer. And we also irregularly work with the people from a local forestry organization to maintain our forest site for some big work projects. And our Segway guides and the cafe staffs join our garden work for early spring and autumn at the busiest, the time of the season.
Not too bad then.
Yeah, not too bad, but still small team. And I eagerly hope to have 2 more skilled, the gardener and field keeper in my team, which is ideal number of people to keep the forest beautiful and make it better.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the other hand, I understand the reality that we have a dominant winter season for 4 months, and we can open the garden for public for 7 months. So small team with, I can say, variable working hours system is essential.
Yeah.
So we lively work a lot during the growing season, and we take a rest a lot during the snow season, just like our, the plants do in the garden. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you have to kind of pack it all into shorter seasons.
Yes.
So one of the things I was thinking when I was reading the book was, how do you travel around a site that big? How do you get around?
Basically by foot, car, and truck, and rarely by horses with our friend horseman to access to the deepest forest site. Yeah.
Horseback gardening is a novel one. I don't think many people do that here.
Yeah, so when we had a serious natural disaster by typhoon attack 2016, actually, we couldn't access to any of the site, deeper, the first site. So we couldn't, the access by foot or car. So I asked our friend Horseman to, let us ride and horse and to check that how damaged we got that. So, and, it's quite an unusual thing, but but also it's very functional and useful. So yes, horses is big help.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I was wondering, how do the horses, well, when you're on horseback, obviously you're kind of probably a bit safer, but I was intrigued to know, what is a bear bell and why might you need one?
That's a very interesting question, Sarah.
Well, it is for people in the UK. I don't think we have those hazards.
Of course. Yeah. A bear bell is one of the ideas not to encounter, each other, and obviously to protect ourselves from tragedy. We can let the bear know humans are being there or coming closer by making a sounds, and give a bear time to be able to go away, because they also don't want to encounter humans. So, yeah, I actually have my bear bell. This is the sound.
Fantastic.
And so I always say, if you don't have a bell, you just keep singing loudly,
Oh, we don't have anything like that over here for sure. So when you mentioned, obviously, when the garden is in full winter, you don't the gardeners can't do very much work. So is the site still open to visitors during that time, or is the whole thing closed down?
We are closed from November to the end of April, usually. And then during those times, we keep working outside for forestry and shoveling snow goals, but we do mainly inside work at the greenhouse and the office.
Oh, right. Yeah. So you can still work during that time. You just don't venture too far. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was thinking about the site is, as you said, it's not completely primeval, or it hasn't been since, centuries ago. But if you just left the forest to evolve, would that work? And does it need human intervention, or would it kind of go back to a natural state?
I think if the land once was cultivated by human's hand, I believe that thoughtful human intervention is required. So, for example, we have several sites to nurture endemic flora. We call it native flora, but in the first floor, by cutting vigorous sasa bamboo back and encouraging the seed bank of the other species. If nobody touches the site, we will soon lose the opportunity to meet those, the various plants and study what kind of vegetation that land actually has. So, and also this activity also is connected to see potential for horticulture and its development. So, as long as we hope to create a landscape beautifully harmonized between wild nature and human's life, we need to, put our hands into the land, I think. Yes.
And the sasa is invasive. Did that originally get imported into the site?
Oh, yeah, originally, but it's original. It's native. It's not a bad, the plant at all, but it's just a very vigorous and invasive. And first floor can be monoculture, vegetation easily. So we also, of course, have a lot of, the first floors only, monoculture of sasa bamboo, because we don't cut the whole site back. So it's not a bad thing, but as long as we would like to see the rich vegetation. So that's what we do. Yeah.
Understand. So roughly what percentage of the plants are endemic to that area that are on the site now? Well, particularly in the gardened area.
Okay. We have the garden in a forest as well. So then in the forest, of course, 100% of the plants are endemic, including naturalized species in the past. And for example, in the Meadow Garden, ornamental perennial garden that Dan designed, that's about 10% is endemic. But Dan and I keep the planting mix developing all the time. So it possibly is going to be increased in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure. Did you need to be careful when you were introducing new species into the gardened areas that they weren't invasive?
Not serious, but of course we were afraid of that at the beginning, but until now there is no problem.
Mm-hmm.
But we must be careful, the native plants also that escape from the forest into the garden. Like sometimes it's going to be really, really successful. Like, for example, some of them naturally came into the garden and showed us fantastic combination with the perennials that we planted. So Dan and I decided to welcome them. They are native, but welcome them in the Meadow Garden. And so yes, it happened to each other.
Yeah, definitely. What interested me as well is that in the forest areas, I think when Dan first came to the site, the landscape was novel to him, and he saw great beauty in all of the native plants. And I wondered do visitors, particularly from Japan, do you feel that they appreciate the plants in the same way? Do they look at them with such fresh eyes as Dan did?
Yeah, I think, in Japan there are many enthusiasts who especially love endemic plants. So they tend to come to the Millennium Forest on peak season of our, the endemic plants blooming in our spring. And a lot of visitors, as all, the plant lovers visitors, so they enjoy meeting both, native or non-native plants. Yeah, that we invited to make a garden.
Yeah, I'm just thinking in the UK, if you presented a wild area, I think a lot of people would be a bit blind to the plants that are there because they are so common. And I'm not sure you would get that wow factor, but obviously that works at the forest. So yeah, I think possibly maybe more interesting plants, a more interesting set of native flora. Yeah. Obviously, you've got a very, very big site there that you're trying to plant. So, can you talk a bit about how you expand your stock of plants?
Okay. We simply the collecting and sowing seeds and splitting and transplanting and thinning invasive to make ideal balance, especially in a native vegetation. And as I said, we are a small team, so I would like to save our time for one work as much as possible. So I often split. It sounds a bit, strange, but so I often split it in a parent plant that I call in the forest floor by digging just a piece out from the whole plant and leaving the rest in the ground. So, and I don't need to dig the whole plant out from the ground. It actually works well. Less damages, less work, and the parent plant will quickly, recovers. So, something like that.
Yeah. So obviously you're open not November to April, but the rest of the time. If people were thinking of visiting particularly from overseas, is there a best time to visit?
It's a tough question.
Yeah, I thought it would be.
I think it depends on what you want to experience in the garden at the Millennium Forest. If you'd like to witness, strength of plants and feel energy of them, the surviving long harsh winter, from the middle of May to the early June is the best season. And personally, Meadow Garden in September is my favorite. Full of seed heads, flowers, grasses mingled with early autumn colors, absolutely evoke your emotions, and I often recommend to come to visit us and grab your sentiment.
Right. Yeah, lovely. And is it particularly hot at any time of the year?
Oh, yes. In May, you cannot believe this, but in May, every year we're going to have the hottest temperature in Japan, actually.
Wow.
There are so many people don't know this, but yes, we record every year. We record Tokachi record the hottest temperature in May.
Wow.
Just a couple days, but we recorded.
Yeah.
Also that in July and August, hot, humid summer, but of course milder than mainland because Hokkaido is a cooler, climate condition than mainland. So, but yeah, if you'd like to travel around, with gentle weather, climate condition, yeah, June, the beginning of July, September, October is really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how would you recommend taking more than one day to visit the forest?
Definitely. It's really nice to travel around Hokkaido. So also in the Millennium Forest, I think 1 full day, ideally, of course. But yeah, in Hokkaido, that we have a lot of dynamic landscape, and also that there's a lot of gardens. Very unique, the style. Each garden has unique style. So yes, more than 1 day. Definitely.
So looking forward to the future of the project, obviously it's such a long-term project. How are you training your successor, or do you have a team of successors? Because obviously at the moment you have a lot of influence over the site, as does Dan, and I wondered how moving forward you'll kind of ensure that continuity or vision.
Right. Yes, first of all, yes, I am a training successor or a team of a successor. And I'm not sure about a team of successor, but I hope some of them will be successful for the Millennium Forest in the future. And as the first generation of the Tokachi Millennium Forest Garden team, and Dan and I have worked very hard to build up its foundation. And it is still carry on, but I also have been caring about the next generation since the very beginning, because the more, I work in the Millennium Forest, the more I have realized that my hands of every single day have a mission to surely pass, the baton to the next. So, yeah, I do hope one of, trainees or my gardeners going to be our successor for the Millennium Forest. And I actually don't so seriously ensure continuity, because the garden will be changed as new era when gardener's hand will be changed. And I think it must be the positively exciting and interesting part of the gardening. So design, we could, take over the drawings, or of course, and the plants themselves can be the footprints of what we do. So, yeah, I feel right to become just a part of it with hopes, I can say.
It is such a significant project. What does the garden mean to you?
To me, the garden is the most joyful and happiest place on earth, because we cannot live without a plant. And as one of the tiny little creatures surviving in the wild or not, the garden is my life itself, and the garden is a place that my soul comes from and returns.
Thank you, Midori. Here's Dan describing the site and what the owner, Mr. Hayashi, set out to achieve with it.
The site sits on the very edge of an agricultural plain that was cleared much earlier in the 1900s to make way for the growing of wheat and root vegetables and things which do very well in Hokkaido, which is the northernmost island in Japan. And the soil is deep and alluvial, and it has really been what Hokkaido has made its living from, that and forestry. So the land went up to the base of the mountain, and then his land extends up into the mountain into forest, which has been felled once or possibly twice, with the main oak removed in the early 1900s and then regenerated again, and then another round of oak removed, and then often in places pulp, newspaper pulp, larch replaced, so that really it starts to become forestry rather than natural forest. And what he wanted to do was to really address this imbalance that we have imposed on the land by taking away the forest and changing the conditions, and looking at a way in which he could preserve this piece of land, which was about 400 hectares by the time he'd completed buying the various parcels. So flat land running up into mountain, the very highest parts of the land being inaccessible, and showing us that there were places where there was still natural forest, where the lumber had not been extracted.
When I was reading the book, it really struck me, I think, that water has shaped the design and the planting on the site. Is that true to say?
There are fast-moving streams which come out of and down from the mountains, and they kind of bisect the site and weave their way through the woods. So there's an ever-present movement of water, and you can even hear it in the winter because it's sort of gurgling underneath the snow cover. And the water is never a problem. We've never watered once in the gardens that we've made there, because the climate is damp. There are mountain mists that come down, and summer rains, and we're now finding, as the climate's changing, that there is now a July monsoon period. Midori, the head gardener there, calls it a monsoon. It's not strictly speaking a monsoon, but it's definitely a summer wet period. And it's been something that we've very much had to incorporate in the way that everything has been approached. So there are bridges that go backwards and forwards over the streams so that you can use them really as places of focus, and they help to animate the landscape and provide this constant interest. But when there was a big typhoon, for instance, in 2016, the streams swelled and they swept away all the bridges and brought down huge boulders from the mountain. And at that point, you could see that this is a wild and raw landscape. You're very near and close to Russia on that border up there. And it's a landscape which kicks back big time and makes us realize that we're really very small. So there was considerable damage from that typhoon, but miraculously, nature is such a powerful thing that it's repaired itself, and the gardeners there have managed to repair the land that we've been tending, and it's back on track again, though definitely something that was very humbling when it happened.
Yeah, I can imagine. I was quite intrigued by the notion. Obviously, Japanese gardening, I think we associate it with the ornamental and, to a degree, formal, not maybe in the way that we kind of understand it in English gardens, but certainly there's a formality incorporated. And when you designed and planned the forest, you obviously brought in a lot of a naturalistic ethos. And I wondered if, since the forest has been in situ, do you think it's had a knock-on effect the way that people garden in Japan? Has it opened up that kind of naturalistic aesthetic to a wider audience over there?
I think there's always been an interest in nature, but there's a big divide between the interpretation of nature and naturalism, I think. But because the Japanese gardens are often emulating nature and stylizing it, it wasn't such an enormous leap in a way to get people to look at nature again through a naturalistic approach to the planting. There had already been a bit of a cottage garden, Western style craze, which of course had introduced the idea of informality, but I think linking it much more closely to nature and nature being the inspiration rather than a kind of muddle of English cottage gardenness. I think it touched a note with people, and I think that the garden has really shown people that is potential in a different way of tending plants and looking to nature as the inspiration. There's this wonderful discipline there called Satoyama, which is about only taking what you need out of the landscape to live closely alongside it. And of course, this was from when there wasn't so much pressure on landscape, when there were people living in more harmony with the land. But there is still residue of people going out to forage for mountain vegetables and things, and that appreciation of plants growing in the natural environment. So what we really did was to key into aspects of that approach of living closely with nature through Satoyama, and made sure that the garden had a feeling of that old culture in the way that we were tending the plants.
Because it's a very important site, and I think probably a site of that size and that importance does need some form of community involvement and buy-in. And I wondered how much that had happened as part of the process of the design and indeed going forward with this site.
Well, interestingly, Satoyama wasn't part of the Hokkaido landscape. Hokkaido was only settled in the late 1800s. It was previously a land that was occupied by a tribe called the Ainu, an Inuit tribe called the Ainu. So our modern culture there really has not taken with it some of those old ways. So what Midori, the head gardener there, is doing is really reintroducing those old ways of tending the land back into the landscape again. And she has to be very careful with who's actually working in the garden, because it's very carefully managed. You know, it's a very small team that's there. So she doesn't have a volunteer scheme, but she does have local people who come to help and work. So she has a team of women who have retired from work, for instance, who come in and work for her as weeders. So there are these fleets of women who come in and help at certain times of year, you know, which is really fantastic. And then she has students who come from overseas. So every year there are 2, perhaps 3 students who come and work within the gardens as well, but very much under her tutorship, so that the ways that are being learned are being communicated really clearly and thoroughly. It's a very small team, and as soon as you get volunteers involved, you need to have a special and dedicated amount of time to look after those people. And she's found a way of making it work so that she does have the inclusion of people who are not just staff.
Yeah, I was asking her about that actually this morning when I spoke to her, and it is an interesting concept, and I think it's one that we wrestle with a lot of our historic gardens. You know, what happens if a garden is so kind of linked to the people who have developed it, planned it, designed it, worked in it? What then happens when, say, that person is no longer there? You know, how does that process of handing the reins over work, especially with a garden that it has got such a huge kind of future ahead of it? And it is a very interesting question, and it's one I guess that maybe you wrestled with from the start.
Well, you know, a garden is the gardener in a way. You know, it's a truism, and we would not be able to do what we're doing in the garden parts of the garden without Midori. You know, she's an absolutely vital link. She's a brilliant gardener. She's a really good communicator. She understands the whole ethos, you know, which is really not the Japanese way. So she's bringing in the Japanese way to something which is much more Western style in a way, and developing this very interesting hybrid. And what we hope, of course, is that through doing something like the book, that we can communicate how things are done at the Millennium Forest and why it's important, and get people's buy-in to how to nurture and look after that place. And hopefully that will take us into the future with some sort of security in a way in terms of that custodianship.
Talking about it being a you know, maybe a slight hybrid between different cultures, Could you see a similar garden existing like that anywhere else in the world?
Oh, absolutely. I think, what's brilliant about this idea, Mr. Hayashi's original idea that the garden is sustainable for 1,000 years, is it really gets you to think about what does that actually mean? Because, of course, we can't guarantee any of that. But what we can attempt to do is to engender a love of a place through caring for it and tending it, so that it does have some future built into it through the buy-in of people, through their passion for it as it develops.
And how do you see the site evolving with climate change?
It's really difficult to say. Since I've been going over the last 20 years, we've already seen a difference. The snows are coming in slightly later. They're there now, actually, often at the beginning of November. But if the frost comes in before the snow, it goes down to minus 25 in the middle of the winter. If the frost is already in the ground, the plants that we've planted, which are actually protected by the eiderdown of snow, are much more vulnerable if they go into winter with frost in the ground underneath the snow blanket. So we're starting to see that snow cover changing. We're starting to see a different pattern of wet weather in the summer. So it does feel like it's accelerating. It feels like it's very fast. And of course, there have always been weather pattern changes, but we just can't assume that we're looking at a stable future on that front. And as gardeners and people who are nurturing this landscape, we can only do it in the time that we've got to do it. So that we hope that what this place has become in terms of people's love for it and engagement with it will be the thing that takes it into the future. And whatever the climate does, we will have to adapt to.
This isn't meant to be a flippant question, but obviously when you design a garden or you work in a garden, you put a maintenance plan in place and you put plans in place for the future. Is there a plan that sees it through 1,000 years in the future? How far ahead do you plan with a garden like this?
I think we're planning 30 to 50 years. And the blueprint is something that could be picked up in 30 years' time and then given another 30 to 50 years. So we've put a blueprint in place which is robust as a concept and an idea. And of course, each generation that comes on board to look after this, Midori's replacement eventually, and somebody who might be my equivalent eventually, if the idea is strong enough in the first place, that's the thing that will be robust. So we can't possibly plan for that far into the future. So this is an aspiration. It's an idea about getting people to engage with land so that they understand it and care for it and nurture it and see it as being something that is fragile and needs to be looked after with care and not simply just taken from.
This is a bit of a flight of fancy, I suppose, but if you could time travel forwards 1,000 years, where would it be? Where would you want it to be?
I don't, this isn't meant to sound kind of too doom and gloom, but I don't know how much of a presence we will have in 1,000 years. I've just got no idea. It feels to me that regardless of the human presence on this planet, that nature will find a way of adapting. It's much stronger than we are. And I'm guessing in a way that we're going to have to learn to live with it and what it's starting to throw at us in terms of big changes. Otherwise, we're simply not going to be able to work with it. So it would be fascinating to see what happens. I think that right now we need to be humbled by what's happening with the climate change and really listening. Otherwise, we are going to be thrown off.
Yeah, that's the completely unique thing about this space, is that it does put you in context in in time, and it makes you think big scale rather than just, what's coming up next year. It's a completely different perspective and outlook on a garden, and that's what makes it brilliant. Has it exceeded everyone's expectations, do you think?
I think it's a place if you go there, there's something very powerful about the place anyway. It sits at a particular point in the mountains and the way the light falls on it. And I think sometimes certain places just have a much higher resonance, and it's somewhere that is always going to be special. And I think that because we've been allowed to apply quite careful energy to this place and fine tune it, it's really shown everybody that there are extraordinary things that can be done, even if they're sometimes very light of touch, when you strike a balance with a piece of landscape. So I think that in some ways it really has shown people that the lightness of touch, the very fact that they've got such a small number of people looking after this place, and yet there's this much magic and this much message that comes out of it. I think that slowly people are beginning to see that it's really got something.
I think maybe it's important because it's not just completely wild. It is the fact that it's cultivated to a degree that draws people in and kind of starts that relationship with wilder spaces. Do you see it as that, as having that effect?
Well, I think as a landscape designer, one of the things that I wanted to do there was to make some places that felt familiar or safe because they had been tended and nurtured. And I think one of the things that we were finding when I first went out there in 2000 was that people were intimidated by the forest because it was big and wild and rough, and there were bears in the forest and unknowns, And by making ways into it that allowed you to feel part of it, i.e. just the simple decking walkways we've got through the first parts of the woods and the bridges over the streams, it makes it feel managed. It makes it feel like a safe place. And by creating a number of places where you can see that care applied, I think it allows people to see things in a way that's non-threatening. And when your defenses are down, you start to see things in a much deeper way, I think, often. And it becomes a fuller experience for that feeling of feeling comfortable in the place and able to look at it without feeling overwhelmed by the scale or the roughness of it or the fact that you have these such dramatic seasonal changes. It becomes somewhere that you can enter and be part of, instead of feeling fearful.
I get the connection that you and Midori feel. It feels almost spiritual to the place. And I asked this question of Midori, but what does the garden actually mean to you?
I think it's for me it's an extraordinary opportunity really to engage with this idea of things in a very long-term way and to see what I do as a landscape designer as being as much about conservation as it is about providing a place for people that, as you say, is a spiritual connection with nature. So in a way, it's allowed me to go really quite deeply into what makes that place tick and how can the best things of it be revealed. So it's something that's evolved over a long time. And as you get to know something over a long time, your relationship with it becomes much deeper. So I feel very connected, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book, really to honor the place and to allow people who wouldn't have the opportunity of getting that far to see it, to be able to feel part of it and feel some of that potency and the message that it has behind it, to look after landscape, to see it as being something that is finite and should be treasured.
My thanks to Dan and Midori for speaking about the Tokachi Millennium Forest project. and for talking openly about their personal connections to the site and the special place it occupies in the landscape and in time. If you want to see how humans can be utterly immersed in and inseparable from a landscape, then I wholeheartedly recommend reading the book. Thanks to you for listening, and I'll leave you with Dr. Ian Bedford talking about a visitor you might find on your ivy when it starts to flower.
Throughout the year, Hedera helix, the common ivy, which is our only native evergreen vine, plays an important role within the environment, providing shelter and a stable habitat for numerous different species of Britain's wildlife. But then throughout autumn, the ivy blooms and becomes one of the most significant food sources for many end-of-season pollinators that are busy preparing themselves for the winter ahead. Attracted to the plant's yellowy-green floral clusters by their pungent perfume, the generalist feeding wasps, bees, flies, beetles, and even late-season butterflies will often transform the normally serene appearance of an ivy into a frenzied hive of activity as the insects compete for the flower's freshly produced nectar. And in the midst of this melee, particularly within southern England, it's becoming increasingly more common for us to find a colourful non-native bee called the ivy mining bee. First recorded in 2001, these invasive solitary bees, with their orange and black striped bodies and fluffy ginger thorax, hatch from their pupae within underground chambers to coincide with the ivy's flowering period. The males always emerge first and wait for the females. Then, as they appear, the males frantically compete with each other to mate, often becoming entangled together in a chaotic mass around the female on the ground. Eventually, a male will succeed before the female leaves for the ivy flowers. She'll then feed for a while on the nectar, restoring her energy before searching to find a slope of bare earth or sand where she can excavate a tunnel, usually alongside many other females that will be doing the same. When completed, she'll return to the ivy to collect pollen that she takes back to her tunnel, leaving it inside with a newly laid egg. She'll then repeat this over a few weeks until the tunnel is full of little chambers, each containing ivy pollen and an egg. The bees will then die before winter, leaving their eggs to hatch into tiny grubs that feed on the pollen and develop alone into the next generation of ivy mining bees that'll once again emerge the following autumn, just in time for the ivy flowers.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, rootsandall, Facebook, rootsandall UK, and Instagram, rootsandallpod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.